Hello, I'm Ian Mean and welcome to the latest in the University of the West of England's Distinguished Address Series. This evening I'm talking to John Manzoni. John is the head of the Civil Service, a very, very big job, controlling something like 400,000 people. His big challenge, how does he change it? John, how to change the civil service? Well, how are you going to do it?
Well, I would say, first of all, not overnight. It's obviously a big task, partly because it's such a busy place. But it's also true, fundamentally how we're going to do it is the introduction of different skills which over a period of a decade and a half have essentially been allowed to atrophy to some degree in the civil service. So I'm all about introducing new skills into the civil service, whether those are technical skills, because of course technology has advanced massively and allows us to do things so much differently, so much cheaper, so much better, or commercial skills. If the civil service is going to get smaller, the demand isn't going away, so we've got to use the private sector more, and therefore we've got to get smarter about how we partner with the private sector. So the introduction of new skills is a first place to start.
Yeah. Now, looking at your speech this evening, you're pretty impressed by the civil servants by the look of it. You say, and I quote, you say something to the effect, yeah, I see more commercial deals done in a week than I'd seen in a year in any private sector company. That's quite a compliment, isn't it? To an organisation that is absolutely pilloried in the press. In fact, it's a terrible press, doesn't it?
You know, it's interesting. So I've spent 30 years, in oil and gas companies. I arrive in the civil service, and there's a couple of things that strike me. The first is they're incredibly smart people. The second is they have an extraordinary public service ethos, which actually any company would be really proud of. If you had that sort of seam running through your company, you'd be really incredibly proud. And
does that mean loyalty?
Loyalty to the public service, actually, yes. And so therefore loyalty to their organisation, but predominantly loyalty to serving the public, doing a good job to the public. Now, I'm not saying it's not all fantastic, because of course there's lots for us to do and lots for us to improve. But the individuals, the quality of the people is really, really very, very impressive. And the other observation is there's a hell of a lot going on every single day. Where it's a when I say more commercial deals, because we contract with the private sector from everything from building the nuclear submarines to running the buildings to testing the health of people who we need to get back into work. All of these things are done by the private sector. So the nature of what those things are, it's incredibly important that we have really good relationships with the private sector. And most often, by the way, they're really difficult things to do, otherwise somebody else will be doing it.
Yeah. Now, you've got 400,000 people. From what I read here, a lot of those are women. Is that right? I think diversity is a big deal in the civil service. And my immediate observation coming from the private and public sector is we are a lot better at diversity of protected categories than in the private sector. Why is that?
Well, because I think it is very important. Well, first of all, it is very important to the leadership of the civil service, and we've been at it for a long time. But much more profoundly, we're here to serve modern Britain, and we better look like modern Britain. Because if we don't look like modern Britain, we're not going to. We are in touch with the people of this country every day in many, many, many ways, and so we have to be absolutely reflective of that population. So we work very hard at it, and it is very important.
Yeah. Now, you're here in Bristol this evening. Just looking through your speech, what I didn't realise is the enormous number of people and resource you have in this region.
Yes, it's an important part. I mean, the biggest single concentration here is, of course, the Abbey Wood Defence and Equipment Supply Organisation, which is...
What sort of figure? You mentioned a figure, didn't you?
Well, what they do, over a 10-year period, they're probably spending on services or on equipment something in the order of £140 billion. So, yes, there's quite a big amount of money going through there, and there's a lot of people. it's a 10 or 12,000 people organisation.
And there's something on the M4 that I didn't know about.
Well, there's lots of places all over the place, but the research councils are down in Swindon. The civil service is present all across the country in many, many different ways, and in fact, in far more ways than a casual observer would really understand. We're sort of present in many, many places. It's not just, from the hospitals, of course, to the emergency services, to the armed forces, to the job centres, to the tax collection offices, to the thousand research councils. So there's a lot going on.
And I was interested about what you're saying about students and apprenticeships. UWE has a really good reputation. Graduates getting jobs within 6 months of graduating. You're taking on in the civil service about 1,000 apprentices, 1,000 graduates a year, is that right?
Yes, we have applications on average, about 20,000 applicants each year for what we call the fast stream, which is the sort of graduate intake. And we select about 1,000 of those, so it's a very highly competitive process. But in addition to that, because of course the government, and rightly so, is saying, look, across the country we need to increase our apprenticeships, 3 million apprenticeships in the country, and it's it's sort of slightly old-fashioned to think, well, I'm going to go to school and then I'm going to go to university and then I'm going to get a job, and the apprenticeship process actually is proving incredibly useful.
And you're not talking about their necessarily higher or degree apprenticeships?
No, there's a whole range. I think we take, and I think we're starting at 16, so we can go all the way through from non-degree apprenticeships, the HND type qualifications, all the way through up to the high degree type apprenticeships. So, and the civil services is going to be out in front. In fact, I was having a conversation with some people about this just the other day. Our plan is to hire about 40,000 apprentices over this Parliament, and it's 2.3% of the workforce, which is about where we're going to pitch it. But actually, we're sort of well on that track for starting right now. So, and it's great. And these young people come in, they get work experience. It's a sort of more, if I could say, it's a rather more modern way of coming out of school and going into work. Right?
Now, changing the subject to something absolutely current, and we saw Sir Jeremy Hayward in front of the Parliamentary Committee yesterday, talking about information. What's your take on this? If I'm a minister and I want to leave the EU, and I approach a government department and I don't think I'm getting the right information, what's your take on it?
Well, look, it's a slightly complicated process because the government has taken a position on the government's position for the EU. And that is that the government is now in favour of the country of a referendum with the intent that the country remains in the EU, in a reformed EU, and that is the position of the government. Now, the civil services role is absolutely clear in that we are there to support the government of the day. In this particular instance, the Prime Minister has offered his colleagues on an individual basis around the cabinet table that they can take an opposing view if that's what they choose to do. Of course, as a civil servant, now it's slightly complicated because that minister might be your Secretary of State in your department. So Jeremy, rightly, has written, I think, some very clear guidance which says, actually, the civil service will support the government's position of the day, and actually, for everything else other than the leave or stay vote, for those Secretaries of State in charge of departments, the civil service will continue to support that Secretary of State in the normal way to conduct their everyday business. But to the extent that that Secretary of State takes the leave, is campaigning for a leave process, then the civil service must be very careful and it won't support it. It won't support him or her. And I think that's actually as clear as it can possibly be. And that is his position.
And I presume that's your position.
Of course it is, because one thing I've learned very quickly in the civil service is the civil service takes this role of impartiality and in support of the government of the day extremely, extremely seriously. And it's interesting because until you're in it, you don't know how quickly this can get complicated. But this one's got quite complicated, and it's jolly good. Therefore you rely on these, on these values and the role and the purpose very clearly. And I think it's been set out very clearly. And of course, people will make mischief, but so be it.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you what I'm interested in, John. By 2020, you say you hope to have delivered the government's 544 commitments. Do you lie awake at night thinking about that? 544 commitments.
When you go through, it's interesting. When one goes through, I suspect, not just the manifesto for this government, this parliament, but I suspect every government for every parliament. When you actually go through and you articulate all of the things that they have said that they will do, I mean, then there's a lot. In this case, there's 544. The good news is, we know what they are.
Where are you on the list then? Are you up 283 or what?
No, I think actually, I don't know. Don't put me on the spot about the exact details. But actually, I don't think that's really the issue. And of course, some of them may or may not be met in the end. But of course, our job is to implement the policies of the government of the day. But I think the complexity here is that we're doing all of those things at the same time as some pretty fundamental transformation of the civil service itself. Some significant reduction in size of the civil service, and that combination of those two things actually that's what keeps me awake at night. The civil service is very, accomplished and practiced at serving the policy and the outcomes and all of those things. And in fact, I think we're pretty good at that. We are well practiced, but we are entering a phase where the civil service is getting significantly smaller, and that's an opportunity on the basis that we can bring in new technology, we can do things, and of course we want to make it as efficient as we possibly can. But it's the combination of both those things that's what I actually stay awake at night and think about.
So is it at the heart of this the culture that you're trying to change?
The culture, some aspects. I mean, one doesn't wholesale change because there's very many very great strengths of the civil service culture, but I think that in some degree, yes, I am. I've spent 30 years executing and delivering things. I believe that we need to introduce more of that in the civil service. I think we need to modernise the civil service in a number of ways. The introduction of these new skills brings a more varied workforce, not so hierarchical, not so, the future of the civil service isn't about jobs for life, because I don't think young people want jobs for life anymore. So we have to evolve this institution, which is at the heart of so much of the country's day-to-day business. We have to evolve it, and we of course have to do that incredibly responsibly, because every single day benefits are being paid, taxes are being collected, people are being cared for in hospitals, and all of that, everything goes on, and that can't stop. So that's the shift. So some aspects of culture, yes, I think we do have to change.
What about yourself personally? What you say, you seem to be doing almost a Prime Minister's job.
Oh no, I don't think I could possibly be qualified to do the Prime Minister's job. I think, credit to those people who, at the top of the civil service, who recognise that the combination of Jeremy Hayward, who runs the civil service and is the head of the civil service, but actually the introduction of a different set of skills. In this case, the Chief Executive is quite deliberately called a Chief Executive because I'm all about making the civil service work better. Not what we do. Actually, that's the Prime Minister's job. What the government does, and therefore the civil service does, that is what the Prime Minister does. My job is to, whatever it is that we have to do, we have to make it work better. So
you'd never be a politician?
I cannot possibly imagine that my skill set and a politician would be, the answer to that is no.
John, thank you.
Great pleasure.